Number 5. The NASA Photoshop cover-up. The most recent of the incidents on this list is the accusation from prominent UFO hunter Scott C. Waring that NASA is editing archival photos to remove alien craft in an effort to hide the existence of extraterrestrials from the people of Earth. As evidence of this, he posted a photo from the 1968 Apollo 7 mission that he claims shows a UFO on his blog, saying that the craft he saw in 2013 had been edited out of the photo by 2015. As he himself put it, "Guys, I discovered this UFO back in 2013 and NASA used my website to edit it out by 2015. Now I have found them in the US National Archives. They have accidentally saved the original Apollo 7 photo with the UFO in it. The photo in question shows a black object seemingly floating below the Apollo 7 spacecraft and above the planet. The supposedly edited photo does not show the small black object." Waring expressed his concerns in the following quote, "This is 100% proof that NASA used my discoveries and used photo editing software to edit out the UFO and then add a lot of contrast to the original photo to cover up most of the detail. Then, to top it off, they no longer have the largest 5 megabyte size to download, but instead only have a tiny thumbnail of about 200 kilobytes in size. Its reduced size and quality has destroyed its usefulness. NASA has to be stopped. This kind of cover-up is very corrupt and deceitful to not only the American public, but the world." Despite these claims, the black mark can be seen in other official versions of the photo, and according to analog film experts, they say it is likely just an imperfection in the photo negative. As they put it, irregular shaped dull marks or roundish spots on the surface of your film are likely to be drying marks, caused by the droplets of water forming in the film's surface during the drying stage. These marks are typically seen on the film backing. Films washed in hard water areas are more likely to see this problem. Is NASA really altering photos in their archives in order to cover up alien life? Possibly. Is this an example of them doing so? I'm not entirely convinced. Number 4. The Space Fireflies. During the race to the moon between the United States and the Soviet Union, one of the landmark moments of the race was the Mercury Atlas 6 mission, when American astronaut John Glenn became the first American to orbit the Earth. As important as this moment was in the history of space exploration, it is better remembered by UFO enthusiasts for what Glenn saw out of his window during the mission. While Glenn was flying over Australia in the Friendship 7 capsule, he looked out the window and saw what he later described as fireflies. Upon seeing this, he radioed the following back to NASA Mission Control: "I am in a big mass of some very small particles that are brilliantly lit up like they're luminescent. They look like little stars." Glenn then tapped on the window, and the fireflies seemed to react and flew away. NASA was of course worried that this was parts of the capsule heat shield collapsing, but thankfully for Glenn, this was not the case. Because the mission wasn't being broadcast live, the firefly story didn't get much media attention, being somewhat of an urban legend. However, when the next American in space, Scott Carpenter, also reported seeing the luminescent particles, NASA had an excuse at the ready, saying that it was caused by ice particles from the condensation of the ship's heat exchanger. While to most this would sound like a plausible explanation, John Glenn maintained until the day he died that what he saw could not be explained by ice particles. What did John Glenn see out his capsule window during the 1962 Mercury Atlas mission? Was it really ice particles? Or is NASA trying to hide the truth from the people of Earth? Was John Glenn right? Is it a coincidence that multiple James Bond films were also directed by a man named John Glenn? We may never know. Number 3. Shuttle Atlantis' close encounter. In an age of internet and live broadcasts, it is getting harder and harder to prevent information from reaching the public, with it usually being only a matter of time before secrets find their way out of the shadows and into the light. Such is the case in our next entry, which happened in 2006 during the STS-115 mission of the Shuttle Atlantis to aid in the construction of the International Space Station. The shuttle and its crew had successfully completed its mission and had almost completed the trip back to Earth when Mission Commander Brent Jett looked out the window and noticed, as he put it, some kind of reflective structure. He radioed Mission Control and told them what he saw, telling them, that what he was looking at, quote, didn't look like anything I've ever seen outside of this shuttle, that's for sure. NASA was worried that whatever the object was, it might be some crucial part of the craft that had broken off. They took control of the cameras that were broadcasting the mission to try and get a look at what Commander Jet had seen. To the shock of all the cameras, it saw 3 bright objects in the sky. The information was picked up by the media, and NASA scrambled to come up with a suitable explanation. They ordered an inspection of the craft to see if it was a broken off part of the ship as they had assumed, but could not find any evidence of damage. When the ship returned to Earth, another inspection was ordered, but once again, no damage other than a small micrometeor impact was found. NASA has never been able to explain what happened during this mission, and seem to have made no effort at all to solve the mystery in the years since. Or do they already know what happened, and simply do not want us to be in on the secret? As disturbing as that prospect may be, it would not surprise me to learn that it is the truth. Number 2. Gordon Cooper's alien adventures. Gordon Cooper is an important figure in the history of space travel, having served as an aerospace engineer, a test pilot, a pilot for the United States Air Force, and being the youngest of the 7 original Project Mercury astronauts. He was the first American to spend a day in space, the first to sleep in space, and was the last American to go on a solo orbital mission, and set the space endurance record when he traveled 3,312,993 miles in 190 hours in 56 minutes, thus proving that astronauts could survive in space for the length of time that would be required to travel to the moon and back. He was an extremely important historical figure, but unlike many other NASA astronauts, he was not shy about talking about the various experiences he had over the years with unidentified flying objects, and the government's effort to cover these experiences up. Gordon Cooper claimed that he had seen his first UFO while flying over West Germany in 1951, but that his first experience with government cover-ups came in 1957 while he was stationed at the Edwards Air Force Base in California. He had put a crew in charge of setting up an Ascania cinetheodolite, which is a photographic instrument used for collecting trajectory data of aircraft, missiles, rockets, and other similar equipment. The equipment was set up on a dry lake bed and set to take pictures at 30 frames per second as aircraft landed. The men later reported to Cooper that they had seen something odd and had captured images of a strange-looking saucer-like aircraft that hadn't made any sound while landing or taking off. The men were used to seeing experimental aircraft, but were unnerved at the sight of this saucer, which had hovered over them, landed about 50 yards away using 3 extended landing gears, but had taken off when they had approached for a closer look. Cooper called a special Pentagon number, which was meant for reporting such phenomena, and was told to have the film developed, to make no prints of it, and to send it to them in a locked courier pouch. However, as Cooper would later admit, they hadn't told him not to look at the negative before sending them out. He looked at them and saw incredibly high-quality images of the flying saucer. He had expected there to be a follow-up investigation, but never heard anything further. He tried to track down what happened to the images, but never found out, assuming that they ended up in the Air Force's Project Blue Book, which was the Air Force's official UFO investigation. He had to deal with more government concealment, this time from NASA, when he did his solo orbital mission in 1963. While being broadcast live on NBC, Cooper told Mission Control that he could see a glowing green object which was rapidly approaching his craft. The object was not an illusion and even showed up on radar, but when he returned to Earth, he was forbidden to talk about the experience any further with the press. The reporters brought in for the subsequent press conference for the mission were also told that they could not ask Cooper about the green orb either. Years later, Cooper would talk about this encounter more openly and discuss the fact that NASA and other government agencies were covering up several stories of UFO encounters. He even spoke to the United Nations on the subject, saying, "Authority is afraid that people may think of God knows what kind of horrible invaders. So the password still is, we have to avoid panic by all means." Did Gordon Cooper really see multiple UFOs during his life? And if so, did NASA and the Air Force prevent the public from learning about these visitors from another planet in an effort to avoid panic? Will there ever be a point in history where they trust the people of the world to be able to handle such news? Much like the identity of the flying saucer's pilots, it is unknown. Number 1. Did we even go to the moon? As we bring our video to a close, we must talk about one of the most popular NASA cover-up theories out there. While several people are convinced that NASA has come across evidence of alien life that they are keeping from us, or that they have even managed to make contact with extraterrestrials, there is still an inherent level of trust involved in those theories. The idea that NASA is covering up such evidence relies on the belief that NASA has really managed to send men to space. However, there are a significant number of people who don't even trust that this occurred, believing that man has never set foot on the moon. In the interest of fairness, let's explore this theory further. The gist of the theory is that while the United United States and Russia were racing to see who could get to the moon first, the United States government built a set and filmed fake astronauts pretending to walk on the moon, broadcasting the footage across the world and effectively ending the space race in their favor. Some theories even say that famous director Stanley Kubrick was hired after the impressive special effects in his science fiction film 2001: A Space Odyssey caught the eye of the US government. He was apparently hired to direct the allegedly fake moon landing. The evidence that people have latched onto over the years include shadows in photos that don't line up how people think they should, claims that the astronauts could not survive the Earth's radiation field, the lack of stars in the moon landing photos, and the infamous American flag that they claim appears to be flapping in the wind despite the lack of wind on the moon. Most, if not all, of this evidence has been explained by NASA, but once someone is convinced that the moon landings are fake, no explanation from NASA is going to convince them. Whether the moon landing is real or not, it is a good example of how the public's trust in a government institution can erode to the point where some people feel like they can't even take the most basic bits of information provided by NASA for granted. Number 5. The Pentagon Accusation. When the subject of aliens or UFOs comes up with the government officials, they are often dismissed with a joke about how the only people who believe in such things are crazy conspiracy theorists. But every once in a while, a government employee will come forward and make claims that such theories are not as crazy as the government would have you believe. Luis Elizondo is one such man. Luis was the head of the Pentagon's Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program from 2010 until 2017, where he apparently had access to the Pentagon's data on UFOs and had to interview military eyewitnesses of UFO phenomena on a near daily basis. He claims that he spent much of his time at the Pentagon trying to get his program to be taken seriously, but that he was suppressed by other branches of the government, such as NASA, for fears that news of alien visitors would incite mass panic. Other government personnel who tried to keep him quiet apparently did so out of religious reasons, with one claiming that he should stop pursuing UFOs and instead read his Bible, as such craft were probably demons. Elizondo has described seeing footage of crafts that have been able to reach speeds of up to 11,000 miles per hour, while still being able to make seemingly impossible, instant 90-degree turns. Other craft have apparently been capable of flight with no visible means of propulsion, meaning that whoever is piloting these crafts is in possession of technology generations more advanced than any currently found on Earth. Luis left his position in 2017 in frustration at the refusal of the various branches of government to brief officials or the public on the multitude of UFO sightings they have collected over the years, and the government has tried to discredit him by saying that he had no assigned responsibilities for the AATIP. This was challenged when former Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid released a statement that Elizondo was indeed in a leadership role in the AATIP program. The fact that the government is working so hard to discredit someone who is trying to inform the public about a matter of public importance is disturbing, but unfortunately not surprising. Number 4. The hacker's discovery. In 2002, a Scottish systems administrator and hacker named Gary McKinnon perpetrated the biggest military computer hack of all time by hacking into 97 NASA and US military computers over the span of 13 months. He claimed that the reason for this behavior was to search for evidence of free energy suppression and any other potential cover-ups by NASA of UFOs or technologies that could be useful to the public. Once caught and arrested, there was a lengthy court case to determine whether or not he should be extradited to the United States to serve his sentence. The news focused mainly on the crime and the subsequent court case, so much so that not many people looked into whether or not he found any evidence of what he was looking for, but according to McKinnon, he did. While looking through NASA's computers, he claims that he came across a document titled Non-Terrestrial Officers. He looked at the document and found an Excel sheet containing the ranks and names of several unknown individuals and a sheet with tabs for material transfers between ships. He then searched records for ships with the corresponding names and found nothing, leading him to believe that the ships were part of a covert non-terrestrial initiative. After a lengthy court case, the United Kingdom decided not to extradite him to the United States, claiming that the crime was committed due to mental illness, and that sending him away would be a violation of his human rights. Is this really the case? Or did he find something in those computers that he was able to trade to the United Kingdom's government in order to avoid being shipped abroad? Number 3. The Challenger Accusation. On January 28, 1986, NASA launched the Space Shuttle Challenger. It had 7 people on board, 6 astronauts and 1 teacher, who had been selected to be a part of the mission as part of NASA's Teacher in Space program. program. Their mission was to study Halley's Comet as it passed near the Sun, and to deploy a tracking and data relay satellite. Due to the novelty of a teacher in space, millions of school children were watching the launch in class when it occurred at 11:39 a.m. Tragically, 73 seconds into the shuttle's launch, Challenger broke apart, and all 7 passengers were lost. President Ronald Reagan created the Rogers Commission to investigate the incident. It was discovered that the cause of the accident was the rubber O-rings, which were supposed to act as a seal in the shuttle's solid rocket boosters, but had stiffened due to the cold of the day, causing them to be less effective in causing the pressurized gas to leak and burn through an attachment strut and the external propellant tank. The combined stress caused the shuttle to be torn apart. The investigation also found a few more details that caused some scandal for NASA. It was discovered that concerns about the O-rings had been raised by NASA engineers since the early 70s, but that NASA had deemed the component acceptable despite the engineers' protests and suggestions that further reinforcement be given to the rings. In 1980, the NASA Verification Committee requested further tests on the joints the rings were reinforcing to test how they would behave at different temperatures. A test that would have exposed the Challenger's fatal flaw, but the program managers decided that such tests were unnecessary. It turned out that other missions in the years between the request for more tests and the Challenger mission had had problems with the O-rings, with them showing signs of erosion or letting in soot, showing that they were not providing a reliable seal. NASA also claimed that all passengers had met their end instantly and without pain, but it was discovered that the astronauts had discovered their emergency breathing packs, showing that they were alive and trying to survive well after the initial explosion. A member of the commission, Robert B. Hotz, went so far as to accuse NASA of a cover-up in both the Miami Herald and the New York Times, saying that their initial statements about the astronauts and other actions by the space agency were part of a broad effort to keep the public from learning that the Challenger crew members might have survived the disaster if certain precautions had been taken. NASA denied such an effort, but as a result of the commission, NASA had to establish the Office of Safety, Reliability, and Quality Assurance to ensure that future missions did not neglect the safety of their crew in such a fatal way. Number 2. Life on Mars. One of the most common accusations against NASA is that they are covering up evidence of alien life on other planets, specifically Mars. While there are too many of these accusations to dive into in great detail, we will be looking at 2 in particular. Richard Hoagland is one of the many people convinced that there is evidence of ancient civilizations on Mars due to NASA photographs that were taken during the 1976 Viking 1 orbit. These photos show what has been dubbed by believers as the Mars Face, a large sphinx-like object. In 1998, the Mars Global Surveyor sent photos of Mars's surface back to Earth, showing only a pile of rocks, noticeably lacking the iconic profile, claiming that it debunked the theory. Hoagland called this a load of baloney, and unearthed a NASA-commissioned report from 1960 recommended that any future discoveries of alien life be kept from the public so as to not disturb the evolutionary flow of the 20th century civilization. Nearly 20 years later, a researcher named Barry DeGregorio, who specializes in the study of microscopic life in Earth's soil, looked at photos released by NASA, and realizing how similar shapes and patterns in the photos were to Ordovician trace fossils he has photographed on Earth, claimed that the Mars pictures appeared to feature trace fossils made by soft-bodied life forms. NASA claims that the shapes are merely rock crystals which are being analyzed. The researcher claims that this is a cover-up, and that he is planning on releasing a report that will blow the lid off of the cover-up. He theorizes that NASA is covering the findings up to avoid jeopardizing their planned 2030 Mars mission. It is hard to say if Mars is or ever was populated by an alien race, but if they were, would NASA tell us if they found evidence once they got there? Number 1. The Astronaut Accusation. One of the leading causes of people who claim to believe in aliens and UFOs not being taken seriously is a perceived lack of credibility. If someone reports seeing a UFO, many people immediately assume that the person either saw an airplane from a weird angle, is lying, or is insane. Which is part of why it is so exciting when someone with a staggering amount of credibility comes out in support of the idea of alien life. Edgar Mitchell is one such person. Not only does he have 2 Bachelor of Science degrees as well as a doctorate in aeronautics from MIT, but he is also a former NASA astronaut who was the 6th man in history to walk on the moon as part of the 1971 Apollo 14 mission. In fact, he is tied with fellow astronaut Alan Shepard for the record of the longest moon moonwalk in history, having tread its surface for over 9 hours straight during his mission. Mitchell has not said how he knows this for sure, but he said in an interview in 2008, when asked about his opinion on alien life, that, yes, there's not much question at all that there is life throughout the universe. I'm totally sure we are not alone. He went on to claim that he had intelligence that proved, quote, that we have been visited on this planet and the UFO phenomenon is real, though it's been covered up by governments for the last 60 years or so. In other interviews, Mitchell has confirmed the 1947 Roswell incident and has described aliens as harmless little people. When asked about the former astronaut's comments, NASA curtly replied, quote, NASA does not track UFOs. Dr. Mitchell is a great American, but we do not share his opinion on this issue. Number 5. Aliens on the Sun? In December 1995, the joint NASA-ESA Solar and Heliospheric Observatory Mission, or SOHO for short, was launched in an effort to study the Sun so that we could learn more about it. SOHO has allowed us to study the Sun inside out, helping us to learn about its internal structure, its extensive outer atmosphere, and the powerful solar winds that blow across our solar system. SOHO was integral in proving once and for all that the Sun does not in fact wear a giant pair of sunglasses, as has been implied by several children's art projects. SOHO captures images across several different spectrums of light, most of which are then made available for public consumption on the internet. Most of these images are pretty innocuous, but sometimes, someone will see something that can't be explained, proving that sometimes staring at the Sun can be beneficial. A UFO enthusiast was looking at the photos of the Sun and noticed a black square of the photo cut out. At first, he thought it was a technical issue, until he looked into it more. Here's the story as he related it. On June 28th, I found what looked like a mistake in the photo, but looks more like a black cube that is in orbit around our Sun. Sure, one photo mistake, right? Wrong. NASA and SOHO have the most advanced telescopic equipment available. For a cube to be missing from the photo, either it was cut out by NASA to hide something, or is it a flying cube in orbit around the Sun? Crazy? I think not. How often do you look directly at the Sun? Never, because it will damage your eyes. So it would go unnoticed. However, scientists around the world have stated there are UFOs orbiting the Sun many times larger than the Earth. I have recorded 3 instances of this cube flying around in different positions this month. For a long time, it was assumed that these squares were simply a computer glitch, but 4 years later, the squares showed up in a photo again. But the idea that this was a technical issue was called into question when separate UFO enthusiasts came forward with photos from a different SOHO camera that showed the square in the same spot. Is there a cube-shaped UFO orbiting the Sun? Or is NASA editing out something from the photos before releasing them? If there is something there, what are they trying to accomplish by hiding it? Number 4. Neil Armstrong's alien encounter. On July 20th, 1969, history was made as the Apollo 11 lunar module landed on the Moon, allowing its crew members, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin, to become the first humans to ever walk on the Moon. It was a landmark day for humanity, and Neil's first steps on the Moon were broadcast on television, where it was witnessed by over 650 million viewers. During his moonwalk, he had access to 2 radio channels, one that would let everything he said be broadcast both to television and mission control, and another that would allow him to speak only to mission control. At some point in the moonwalk, Armstrong switched over to his private channel. When asked in later years why he had switched to his private channel and what was said, Armstrong said, "I have no comment on that, and am uncomfortable discussing the topic in any further detail." During the time that the radio communication was unavailable to the public, several amateur ham radio enthusiasts managed to tune in to the private channel. The following quotes from the incident have been corroborated by hundreds of unrelated operators who were all tuned in at the time. I say that there were other spaceships. Those are giant things. No, 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 this is not an optical illusion. No one is going to believe this. They're here, under the surface. We saw some visitors. They were here for a while observing the instruments. I say that there were other spaceships. They're lined up in the other side of the crater. My hands are shaking so badly I can't do anything. Film it? God, if these cameras have picked up anything, what then? I didn't have any film at hand. 3 shots of the saucers, or whatever they were, that were ruining the film. They've landed here. There they are, and they're watching us. In the years since, this was denied by Armstrong and NASA, but Buzz Aldrin did say there was at one point an unknown object tracing their path to the moon. Were some of the over 650 million beings watching the moon landing visitors from another world? We may never know for sure. Number 3. NASA cutting the live feed. Another of NASA's crown jewels is the International Space Station, which, as the name suggests, was built with the collaboration of other countries in an effort to collect data and therefore raise our understanding of the universe and our place in it. The International Space Station broadcasts a live stream that anyone on the internet can watch. But sometimes the feed is lost. Sometimes this feed going down feels somewhat convenient. On July 9th, 2016, the live feed showed a bright glowing object falling into view of the camera. Just as the object is about to get into a more viewable position, the feed dropped, and a message came on screen claiming that technical issues had caused the feed to cut out. One YouTuber grabbed the footage and uploaded it. In the caption of the video, he states that it wasn't necessarily an alien craft and very well could have been a meteor, but the fact that the feed was cut just before the camera could broadcast a clear look was inherently suspicious. A spokesperson for NASA came forward saying the feed being cut was not a deliberate act, explaining that the station regularly passes out of range of the tracking and data relay satellites used to send and receive video, and telemetry from the station. For video, whenever we lose signal, the cameras will show a blue screen or a preset video slate. This explanation, of course, did little to appease the people of the internet, who had already decided that the feed was cut in an intentional effort to prevent the regular people of Earth from learning about visitors from another planet. But as far as explanations from government agency goes, this is one of the better ones I've heard. Number 2. The MJ12 Documents. When John F. Kennedy was made President of the United States in 1960, he quickly developed a reputation of not being a fan of the intelligence community. He believed that certain information should be shared with the people they were governing, and perhaps even more surprisingly, felt that some information should be shared with their Soviet counterparts in the interest of developing a relationship and de-escalating the Cold War in the aftermath of the Cuban Missile Crisis. He apparently drafted and sent a memorandum in 1963, 2 weeks before his death, that requested that NASA initiate broader cooperation with the USSR in their outer space and lunar landing programs. Part of this document says that NASA would have to share classified UFO secrets with the Soviets. It has been claimed that the idea of sharing this information with an enemy state was the last straw for the intelligence community, all of whom apparently formed together to pool information and plans in a group called the Majestic 12, which was supposedly formed by President Truman in 1947 to deal with UFO activity. In documents that had apparently been saved from a fire known as the MJ12 Documents, it is stated that Kennedy has been making inquiries about the Majestic 12's activities that cannot be allowed. The document goes on to talk about how the issue should be handled, saying that when conditions become non-conducive for growth in our environment, and Washington cannot be influenced any further, the weather is lacking any precipitation, and it should be wet. Well, for a layman, this is more confusing than anything. It may be clear when you consider that wet work is a euphemism for assassination. It should of course be noted that official government agencies claim that these documents are forgeries, but it's not like an intelligence agency partially responsible for the death of a president is going to verify documents that supposedly implicate that same government agency. Was President Kennedy killed for trying to force NASA to share information of UFOs with the Soviet Union? If these documents are authentic, it would certainly seem to be the case. Number 1. The Apollo 8 confirmation. The original goal of the 1968 Apollo 8 mission was to be the first craft to leave low orbit and fly in an elliptical medium Earth orbit. JFK had challenged NASA to put a man on the moon by the end of the decade, and that deadline was fast approaching. So, in order to make the most of their opportunities, NASA made a bold call and decided that rather than settling for medium Earth orbit, they would instead quite literally shoot for the moon, which they would then orbit before returning home. Apollo 8 launched on December 21st, 1968, and reached the moon on Christmas Eve. Millions watched as astronauts Frank Borman, Jim Lovell, and Bill Anders made their orbit of the moon. Despite NASA having a reputation for planning everything down to the minutiae, the plans for this broadcast were surprisingly loose. As Borman recalled, "We were told that on Christmas Eve we would have the largest audience that had ever listened to a human voice, and the only instructions that we got from NASA was to do something appropriate." The astronauts chose to take turns reading from the book of Genesis while their craft made 10 orbits around the moon. As Lovell later said, "The first 10 verses of Genesis is the foundation of many of the world's religions, not just the Christian religion. There are more people in other religions than the Christian religion around the world, and so this would be appropriate to that, and that's how it came to pass." With the more sentimental aspects of the broadcast complete and their mission a success, it was time for the astronauts to come home. Mission Control waited anxiously as Christmas Eve turned into Christmas Day to find out if the engine burn for the craft to leave their lunar orbit had worked. Word soon came from Jim Lovell confirming not only that the ship was on its way home, but something else as well. Lovell's radio communication stated, "Roger. Please be informed there is a Santa Claus." In all the hubbub concerning the first lunar orbit, this news seemed almost like an afterthought. But the fact that a NASA astronaut confirmed that not only is Santa real, but that he lives on the moon is astounding. NASA never followed up on this information publicly, but what else have they learned since then? Are the legendary elves really moon people? Is the workshop located on the dark side of the moon? This is yet another example of NASA giving us bites of information that raise more questions than they answer. Number 5. Music on the moon. In May of 1969, man had not yet set foot on the moon, and the United States and the Soviet Union were still locked in an expensive race to see who could get there first. Before the Apollo 11 mission could take Neil Armstrong to the moon's surface, where he could utter the famous words, "One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind," there was one more mission to complete. The crew of the Apollo 10's mission was to fly in orbit around the moon and launch its lunar module, which would go 15.6 kilometers above the moon's surface before returning to the main ship and returning to Earth. The mission was considered a dress rehearsal for the moon landing that would occur 2 months later in July of 1969. A last chance to iron out any kinks so that there would be no surprises on the big day. But the crew was in for a surprise no one saw coming. Music from another world. While the ship was making its orbit, it made its way over to the dark side of the moon. For an hour, the astronauts would be out of contact with Mission Control and would have to fend for themselves. Once out of contact with Earth, they began to hear strange whistling sounds coming in on their radio that they could not explain. The noise and their reactions to it were recorded, and once they were back in contact with Mission Control, they filled their superiors in on the situation. Many theories were offered as to the origin of these sounds, such as magnetic fields or atmospheric interference. But these theories were debunked, as not only does the moon not have a magnetic field, its atmosphere is too thin to carry sound. This bizarre occurrence didn't interfere with the mission, and it was considered a success, which led to the Apollo 11 mission achieving the impossible and putting men on the moon. But the tale of this cosmic whistling was classified, and no one on Earth knew about the mysterious space music until decades later, when NASA's archives were declassified and made available for public access. What was this strange music? Was it simply malfunctioning equipment? Or was it a symphonic congratulations from the other species of the universe, welcoming humanity to the stars? We may never know. Number 4. The Black Knight. This next story takes us through time, from the late 1800s all the way to the late 1990s, giving more than a century of lore to this supposed satellite from an alien world. In 1899, the famous inventor and physicist Nikola Tesla was conducting experiments with radio. During one of his tests, he claimed to hear a strange transmission that he believed was coming not from Earth, but from outer space. If this is true, it means that not only is Tesla the namesake for a line of self-immolating electric cars, he is also responsible for making first contact with alien life through an orbiting alien probe that had remained undetected by humanity for thousands of years. A similar story came to light in the late 1920s, when the radio engineer Jörgen Hulse also claimed to have picked up a strange transmission that had echoed back to him after a delay. These long-delayed echoes, as they were later named, still do not have an official explanation, but many theorize that they originate from the same supposed satellite as the ones detected by Tesla years before. Similar stories began to crop up from multiple sources, including a science fiction author by the name of Duncan Lunin, who claimed to have decoded messages from the Black Knight satellite, which had revealed the existence of an alien race in the Epsilon Boötis, a binary star system in the Boötis constellation. In 1954, a UFO researcher claimed that the United States Air Force had reported that they had evidence of 2 satellites orbiting the Earth, an unusual claim since no country had yet come up with the technology necessary to launch a satellite. In 1963, an astronaut named Gordon Cooper reportedly called in a UFO sighting while making his 15th orbit during the Mercury Atlas 9 space mission. However, this incident is notably missing from the official NASA mission log. The seemingly biggest boon of evidence came to light in 1998 during the STS-88 mission to the still under construction International Space Station, where the first US module was delivered to the ISS, making it an important mission in the history of space exploration. During the construction, one of the astronauts saw something unusual floating above the Earth and managed to snap a picture of it. This photo was latched onto by believers in the Black Knight satellite as proof of its existence. But as they often do, NASA decided to be no fun at all and crap in everyone's oatmeal. NASA claimed that the photo most likely showed simple debris. Space journalist James Oberg, a man with possibly the coolest sounding job title ever, theorized that it was a thermal blanket that had been confirmed lost by the mission that had made its way into the atmosphere and gotten tangled up into a strange shape before eventually burning up. Is there a satellite of alien origin orbiting the Earth that NASA doesn't want us to know about? Or are all these stories merely a combination of technical issues and enthusiastic theorists? Perhaps this is something to debate in the comments below. Number 3. The Brookings Report. In the year 1960, NASA's Committee on Long-Range Studies partnered with the Brookings Institute to create a report for the House Committee on Science and Astronautics titled Proposed Studies on the Implications of Peaceful Space Activities for Human Affairs. Not surprisingly, when talked about in general conversations between UFO and alien believers, it is referred to instead as the Brookings Report. This section theorizes about how the public would react to the discovery of alien life, and how it would affect society, and how the decision would have to be made on whether or not such a discovery would be made public. Some choice passages are as follows. Anthropological files contain many examples of societies, sure of their place in the universe, which have disintegrated when they have had to associate with previously unfamiliar societies, espousing different ideas in different lifeways. Others that survived such an experience usually did so by paying the price of changes in values and attitudes and behaviors. Studies might help to provide programs for meeting and adjusting to the implications of such a discovery. Questions one might wish to answer by such studies would include: how might such information, under what circumstances, be presented to or withheld from the public, for what ends? What might be the role of the discovering scientists and other decision makers regarding the release of the fact of discovery? While it is important to note that the report does not state whether the government should or should not cover up the existence of alien life, should it be discovered, it does state that this is a choice that would have to be made. This report was developed relatively early in the history of space exploration and was presented to policymakers. So we do know that people in charge of government policy were presented with a document that floated the idea of hiding the discovery of alien life from the people of Earth. I don't think the writers of the report were trying to hide anything, but the fact that a report featuring a section on what courses of action should be taken if hypothetically alien life were discovered makes me wonder if this was actually just a way to get the answers they needed without revealing the true implications of the report to the writers. Number 2. Why is NASA altering photos? NASA has a program called Picture of the Day, where, predictably, they post a photo from their various rovers and satellites onto the internet every day for public consumption. One day, in late 2014, the photo they posted was a picture taken by NASA's Cassini orbiter of Saturn's moons, Dione and Titan. It is a stunning photograph, but one internet commenter found something he did not expect when he downloaded and adjusted the photo. While adjusting the contrast and brightness of the photo, he found that it revealed a huge object behind one of the moons that was giving off a rainbow-like aura. Even more disturbing, he saw the photo had been altered with black markings covering whatever it was behind the moon, proving that NASA had altered the photo before posting it. He took his claims online, where they started receiving some attention, but before long he received a comment from someone he was not expecting. The person who had edited the original photo. A NASA employee who explained that the photo was not edited to try and hide any alien craft, but to make up for the technical limitations of the Cassini orbiter as it photographed the two moons. As she explained it, Cassini takes color photos by snapping 3 sequential photos through red, green, and blue filters. In the time that separated the 3 frames, Dione moved, so if I did a simple color composite, I would be able to make Titan look right, but not Dione, or Dione look right, but not Titan. So, I aligned Dione, cut it out, then aligned Titan, and then had to account for the missing bits of shadow where the bits of Dione had been in the 2 of the 3 channels. While this does seem to be a plausible explanation as to why the photo was edited, the original poster remained skeptical. He believed it was possible that NASA had ordered the photo altered before posting it, and then released the explanation once they were caught. Of course, one could argue that if NASA had taken a photo that featured a UFO, and they didn't want the public to know about it, they could have just not posted the photo at all, rather than trying to Photoshop it out and hoping that no one noticed. Number 1. What is NASA hiding at the North Pole? In 2016, a researcher came forward claiming to have proof that NASA was trying to cover up something at the North Pole. He provided older satellite images that seemed to show some kind of crater or hole at the top of the Earth. He believed that this was evidence that supported the hollow Earth theory. The hollow Earth theory claims that underneath the surface of the Earth is more land, as well as a central sun located in the center of the Earth. The claimant says that these photos of a hole at the top of the Earth, first seen in satellite photos from 1968, may not be definitive proof that the Earth is hollow, but the hole's omission from subsequent satellite photos does prove that there is some kind of entrance at the pole that NASA is trying to hide. Many explorers have tried to reach this area hoping to prove the theory's validity, but many of them did not survive the journey, and those who did came back with stories that simply cannot be taken seriously. One group claimed that the hole was real, and that once they managed to lower themselves into it, inhabited by a small race of creatures. The explorers kept their distance but reported seeing some kind of factory in the distance that seemed to be running all throughout the day and night. Stranger still were the emissions being generated by the factory, as whatever was fueling it was giving off a smell not dissimilar to ginger. Not wanting to push their luck, the explorers took photos and came back the way they came, but when they checked their cameras, they found that some kind of magnetic interference from the pole had wiped their cameras' memory cards. They came forward with these claims, and NASA firmly denied that their claims had any validity, saying that the explorers were simply mad or looking for attention. However, another government agency, NORAD, has been more forthcoming about what is happening at the North Pole, and released a report stating that it is a consistent site of UFO activity. Every year around the winter solstice, they've reported a small flying craft exiting the North Pole and traveling around the world at super speeds, seeming to visit every country on Earth in just one night, before returning to the pole and not being seen again until the next year. What is this strange craft? Is it traveling around the Earth in order to spy on its people? Is it friend or foe? What is the purpose of the bright red light shining at the head of the craft? Is it connected to the explorers' stories? And if so, why has NASA not come forward to us with information?
Number 5. Al Worden. American test pilot, engineer, and NASA astronaut Alfred Merrill Worden was the module pilot for the Apollo 15 lunar mission in 1971. One of the 24 people who have flown to the moon. Woohoo! He's got a couple of firsts, though. He orbited it 74 times in the command module. He was the first to drive a moon car. After Apollo 15 reached lunar orbit and his crewmates departed, and Worden spent 3 days alone in his module. That's terrifying. Traveling the furthest out from any other human. After he returned, the crew and him became involved in a NASA controversy, however. Not over leaked alien info, but over postage stamps they had taken to the moon. Yeah, big no-no apparently. They were reprimanded by NASA and did not fly in space again. Worden remained at NASA until 1975, then entered a private sector. And then it gets weird. On a British television morning show, Al Worden started talking about some interesting stuff. They asked him, "Why should we keep going back to the moon?" He paused and replied, "Survival. Survival of our species." Worden also rejected the notion that humans could colonize planets within our solar system, calling them unsustainable. Then he claims he knows where to find habitable planets. When pressed on aliens if he believes them or not, he said, "Yes. You know, I've been asked that question hundreds of times. Yeah, we are the aliens though. We just think there's somebody else. But we were the ones who came from somewhere else because somebody else had to survive. They got in their little spaceship and they came here and they landed and they started civilization here. And if you don't believe me, go get books on the ancient Sumerians and see what they have to say about it. They'll tell you right up front." End quote. Okay, when you hear an astronaut say that, kinda jarring. Number 4, Roswell. As always, if you dig what we do here on Top 5 Scary, make sure you hit that like button. Birth of the UAP phenomenon. 1945, the US's first nuclear explosion. 1946, first underwater nuclear explosion. 1947, the first crash flying saucer. Coincidence? I think not. Especially since they've been known to hover around nuclear bases. Probably for the better. Humans are kind of the worst. Local rancher Mac Brazel finds the wreckage on his property in Lincoln County, New Mexico. Sheriff Wilcox shows RAAF's commanding officer Colonel Blanchard the materials, and during the night, the Air Force combs the entirety of the property, apparently harboring 2 small injured alien bodies. Taking them, of course, to Kirtland Air Force Base, New Mexico that night. And the very next morning, the Roswell Air Force makes a statement claiming they have recovered a crashed flying disc in local newspapers. Boom! History, baby! Photographs of Jesse Marcel, the head intelligence officer who investigated and recovered some of the debris. The very next day, the Army retracts their statement and all of a sudden, a high-altitude weather balloon. Can you believe that, huh? AKA the birth of a conspiracy theory. Nuclear fission explosions, weather balloons. Something's not adding up here. Number 3, Edgar Mitchell. Edgar Dean Mitchell was a U.S. Navy officer, aviator, test pilot, engineer, NASA astronaut, and of course, a ufologist. Ufology is the pseudo term for somebody who studies the UFO phenomenon. I don't think there's a degree you can get that in. If so, I'm signing up. What school? Sorry? He was the lunar module pilot of the Apollo 14 in 1971 and spent 9 hours working on the lunar surface. He was the 6th person to walk on the moon. Yeah, he was walking while Worden was up there drifting in the currents of space. Mitchell publicly expressed his opinions and that he was sure that there were thousands of UFOs recorded since the early 1940s belonging to other planets. Thousands. Dateline NBC conducted an interview with Mitchell in 1996. He talked about meeting with officials from 3 different countries who claimed that they had met extraterrestrials in person. Quote, "The evidence for alien contact was very strong and classified by governments, who were covering up visitations and existence of alien bodies in places such as Roswell, New Mexico." Mitchell's book, The Way of the Explorer, discusses his journey. In 2004, he told the St. Petersburg Times that the US government was studying alien bodies and that this group had specifically stopped briefing US presidents since the 1960s. He said, quote, "We all know that UFOs are real. Now, the question is, where do they come from?" In 2008, Mitchell then was interviewed and claimed that Roswell crash was in fact the aliens that had contacted humans several times, but that the government had hidden the truth for more than 60 years. Scary stuff, scary stuff. He sadly passed in 2016. If we just reread the credentials alone, just one more time. Number 2, James McDivitt. James Alton McDivitt is an American test pilot, Air Force pilot, engineer, and NASA astronaut who flew in both the Gemini and Apollo programs. After graduating first in his class with a Bachelor of Science degree in aeronautical engineering, he qualified as a test pilot at the Air Force. In 1962, McDivitt was selected by NASA for the Gemini 4 mission. In 1965, he saw, filmed, and photographed an object which approached the Gemini 4 as they were orbiting Earth. Over Hawaii, a craft of some sort. The UFO had a long arm sticking out of it. Here's what Major James McDivitt said. "I was flying with Ed White. He was sleeping at the time, so I don't have anybody to verify this story, but we were drifting in space when suddenly an object appeared in the window. It's a cylindrical object, white. It had a long arm that stuck out of the side. The film was sent back to NASA and reviewed by some NASA film technicians. One of them selected what he thought was what they were talking about, at least before I had the chance to review it. And it was not the picture. It was a picture of a sun reflection on the window. So what were the pictures that he was talking about? In 1975, McDivitt said, "I never made a big deal out of it. It was something I definitely couldn't identify. It looked like a beer can with a pencil sticking out of it." Yeah, I would eventually give up on that too if those were my credentials and people were like, "Yeah, right, James." When somebody has like 25 years of designing and flying space shuttles around, when they say, "Hey guys, I'm seeing something up here," it's not like, "Oh, James, clean those old specs, would you? Yuck, yuck." Houston, we have a problem. And number 1, Gordon Cooper. Leroy Gordon Cooper Jr., an American aerospace engineer, test pilot, U.S. Air Force pilot, and the youngest of the 7 original astronauts in Project Mercury, the first human space program in the United States. You know the pictures. It looks like they're wearing a tinfoil suit, you know? Old school, old school. After service as a fighter pilot in World War II, he qualified as a test pilot in 1956 and then was selected as an astronaut in 1959. In 1963, Cooper piloted the longest and last Mercury spaceflight, Mercury Atlas 9. 34 hours in space. The first American to spend an entire day in space, the first person to sleep in space, and the last American launched on a solo orbit mission. In Cooper's autobiography, Leap of Faith, co-authored by Bruce Henderson, he recounted his experiences with the Air Force and NASA and an alleged UFO conspiracy. Cooper claimed to have seen his first UFO while flying over Germany, then saw them land in a dry lake bed. Cooper claimed up until his death that the US was indeed covering up UFOs. He said that there were hundreds of reports made by his fellow pilots, many coming from the military pilots on radar. In his memoirs, Cooper wrote that he had seen unexplained aircrafts tons in his career, and that in 1978 he actually testified before the United Nations on the topic. He sadly passed in 2004. He was such a strong advocate for disclosure, and all of these astronauts are remembered as putting their neck and name out on the line for some truth. But I mean, those UFO enthusiasts, huh? They're all wackos, right? Right? Number 5, Leland Melvin. American engineer and now retired NASA astronaut Leland Melvin has spent hundreds of hours in space. Literally hundreds. Leland holds 4 honorary doctorates for his service in education, the sciences, and philanthropy. Doctorates. I'm just saying that before the comments start rolling in saying he's just another wacko. He's crazy. They're not wackos, people. Any of them. They've been screened so many times by so many people with so many tests, they have to be damn well near perfect before going up on or in NASA's budget. Before his career with NASA, Leland was actually All-American for football. Detroit Lions, Toronto Argos. Guy made the NFL and then said, "You know what? I think I'm gonna be an astronaut." Like, give this guy a Netflix movie, would ya? He was selected by NASA in 1998 after getting injured with a football career. Guy goes from the turf to working at NASA Langley Center. This guy's put in time, both down here and up there. Mission after mission with NASA. He's got quite the practice at the whole floating around thing. When Leland was pressed about otherworldly visitors and his ideas about the cosmos, he said this when he was working up in orbit. He had seen something translucent, curved and organic looking when he was working with fellow astronaut Randy Bresnik. The pair of them, again, pair of them, called down to NASA to ask what it could be. NASA's official response was, probably ice. Yeah, nice and specific there, Houston. Thank you for that. When has NASA ever said probably? Melvin dismissed this and figured it was NASA's explanation to just cover it up. Like, who's more qualified here? That's all I'm asking. When the most qualified people are like, yeah, I can't tell if that's frozen water or a full-on mothership, Houston. Either they shouldn't be up there at all, or we need some more Windex on those windows there, NASA. Huh? Number 4, Ivan Vagner. As always, if you dig what we do here at Top 5 Scary, make sure you hit that like button or comment down below. It really helps the channel out. Have you ever seen a UFO out there? Yeah, you. Have you seen one? Comment down below with some details about your experiences. I know I have. Twice now. Hence the obsession with all this stuff. Those Reddit rabbit holes, boy oh boy. Speaking of falling into a wormhole of conspiracy and who said what, astronaut Ivan Vagner, or I should say cosmonaut Ivan Vagner, since he's Russian by birth, and although he's bunking up with some roomies up there in the ISS, he was on the ISS as a first timer just back in 2020. Does NASA initiate rookies up there? Like pull pranks on the newbies? Like no gravity, just unbuckle you while you sleep, flow you out, you know? He and fellow Russian Anatoly Ivanishin were working up there alongside Chris Cassidy, the American commander of said expedition. When Vagner was orbiting the Earth, he might have captured some footage of UFOs, better known as UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomena. It's the jargon nowadays. The aurora lights behind Earth's beautiful curves was being recorded from the ISS when he saw a string of really weird lights moving in a really weird way. He labeled the video Space Guests. Vagner tweeted the vid, which apparently shows the aurora australis near Antarctica, and then all of a sudden this blob of organized lights just cruises on over the globe. Looks like a blob of like glitter just trucking across space. Like, what is that? Of course NASA didn't follow up. Like, what are they gonna say? Oh yeah, those are stars that move and blink, I think. I mean, no? Space junk. Yeah, space debris and swamps and things. Also, what a lame excuse. Space junk? Okay, so you're saying there's lots of litter up there, that's what you're saying? That's what just zipped over my house silently, defying gravity and lasered up my cow? Yeah, I don't think so, NASA. Number 3. Chris Hadfield. Retired Canadian astronaut, engineer, fighter pilot, and musician. Ladies and gentlemen, Chris Hadfield flew 2 missions and also served as commander on the International Space Station. Before his career as an astronaut, he served in the Canadian Armed Forces for 25 years as an air commander fighter pilot. So he has the credentials to say the least. In 1992, Hadfield was accepted into the Canadian astronaut program. He first flew in space in 1995, and since then, he says he's seen tons of stuff up there just zipping around that even a man with all those credentials says he can't explain. Quote, "I've seen countless things in the sky, but he has a pretty cool take on it. He doesn't keep it on the DL, he doesn't boast, and he doesn't panic. Seems like Chris has the mentality like, quote, to see something in the sky that you don't understand and then to immediately conclude it's intelligent life from another solar system is the height of foolishness and lack of logic. However, Chris seems to have a little dirt on Mars that maybe we all don't. He said, I think the fundamental question is that Mars was a lot like Earth 4 billion years ago when life first formed. So if it happened here, did it happen there? It would be evident somewhere in the geologic records. All we need is one fossil for proof. He thinks there could be potentially alien life in the clouds of Venus or on the distant moons of one of our gas giants. Researchers have suggested that there could be microbial life in the clouds of Venus because of the presence of ammonia, which on Earth is a key indicator of aquatic life. Aquatic life, eh? Atlanteans? Hadfield on the UAP phenomenon, quote, "We have 7 people living up there. We've been sending people to space since I was born. I spent half a year off planet looking everywhere. It makes no sense at all that intelligent life somewhere from not our solar system could cross interstellar space and just sneak around and only be caught on some strange video by fighter pilots. It just doesn't pass any basic sniff test or logic. It's fun, it's exciting, but if you use reason, the whole argument falls apart." End quote. Okay, Chris Hadfield, keep your secrets from now, you polite Canadian you. Wait till people start looking into Paul Hellyer, another very polite Canadian with some secrets of his own. Until then, you keep distracting us up there with that guitar, Chris. I see you, Jake Sully. Number 2, Michael Collins. NASA veteran and the very first driver up there, Mr. Michael Collins himself served as command module pilot on the historic Apollo 11 mission in 1969. When Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin walked on the moon for the very first time, saying those very first famous lines we all know so well, Collins was back parking that thing up there. Mr. Collins stayed up there by himself in lunar orbit waiting for the safe return of his crewmates. I can't even stay in a basement with the lights off by myself. Imagine being up there just drifting in the currents of matter, like being in the middle of the ocean. Yeah, no way, dude. The astronaut retired from NASA in 1970 and spent his free time answering questions on Twitter. Apparently, he has gotten some really interesting buzz. Mr. Collins invited the interweb to chat, saying, quote, "Are we alone? Hashtag Ask Michael Collins." And boy, oh boy, did he get some responses. Everything from wackos who like aliens to very, very high-ranked generals and pilots who are apparently also wackos who like aliens for talking about this. Collins, quote, "I used to think that NASA sent me to the wrong place, to the moon, because I think Mars is a much more interesting place," end quote. Collins has talked about it in the past about the possibility of alien life existing beyond Earth and doesn't shy away from discussing the topic in full. In 1999, for instance, he even argued on the topic of life developing in other parts of this infinite cosmos. So maybe it has then. He wrote in his book saying, quote, "I am alone now. Truly alone, and absolutely isolated from any known life. Although I may feel like I'm the same person, I also feel that I am different from other people. I have been places and done things you simply would not believe." Collins circled the moon once every 2 hours. What's scarier, walking on an unknown rock that apparently no one's ever visited, or flying all the way around it by yourself in the pitch black with no communications. Collins achieved the rank of Major General. He left NASA in 1970 to join the State Department and later became director of the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum in Washington. One of the most key players in this whole thing. Michael Collins sadly passed in 2021. Number 1. Buzz Aldrin. Of course, the poster child for the whole phenomenon itself, Mr. Edwin Eugene Aldrin Jr. American astronaut, engineer, fighter pilot with a doctorate of science in astronautics. This guy is overqualified, okay? 3 spacewalks in 1966, Gemini 12 mission in 1969, Apollo 11 mission. He and mission commander Neil Armstrong were the first 2 people to land on the moon. Quote, "There was something out there, close enough to be observed. What could it be?" According to Aldrin, on Apollo 11 to the moon, quote, "I observed a light out the window that appeared to be moving alongside us. What could that have been other than a spacecraft from another country or another world? It was either the rocket that had separated from us or the 4 panels that moved away when we extracted the lander, right?" After he returned from his missions, he was convinced he saw aliens while he was out there. Credentials aside, he took a lie detector test, people, which he passed with flying colors. In an interview with C-SPAN Buzz, he talked about the future potential of Earth's moon for humanity. He added a little extra info that might have gained the spark to go back, regarding a certain monolith on a moon. Quote, "Visit the moon Phobos of Mars. There's a monolith there, a very unusual structure on this little potato object that goes around Mars once in every 7 hours. When people find out about that, they're gonna say, who put that there? And you bet, Buzz, I'll be the first one to ask that."
Number 5 on this list is the Navy UFOs. This is one of the most famous alien or UFO encounters the humans have had in the last few decades. Reader's Digest says, when it comes to extraterrestrial life and making contact with those from outer space, everyone has an opinion. Some think it's all a hack, some are open to speculate, and others still are entirely taken with the tales and stories as old as time, cameras poised and tinfoil hats at the ready. UFOs have fascinated and confused us for years as each new flying saucer or hovercraft sighting makes national news and splits us into 2 camps. While it's easy to debunk individual stories, it's way harder to argue with the US Department of Defense. In videos leaked back in 2007 and 2017, the Pentagon has aimed to clear up any misconceptions by the public on whether or not the footage that has been circulating was real. In the video, unidentified objects are seen spinning and hovering in the air and above the water, while 2 Navy pilots remark in shock and confusion over the 2 oblong disc-shaped objects. So you may be thinking, well, how did the government try to hide it if they were the ones that actually released it? Well, they did release it themselves, but we have to remember that that was only after the videos had been leaked. In 2007 and 2017, these videos had made their way to the public without the government's stamp of approval. So everyone was freaking out and speculating on what the heck this thing could be and why we hadn't heard anything about it. What the heck it is, I don't know, but why we hadn't heard about it is because the government had chosen not to tell us. The only reason that they inevitably released the videos is because they got their hand caught in the cookie jar. They were found out. They were exposed when these videos were leaked. At that point, they could either continue to vehemently deny something that was clearly pointing towards naval activity, or they could fess up and release it themselves in hopes of taking less public backlash. They opted to do the second one because, in their words, they wanted to clear up any misconceptions by the public. That, however, is code for, we got caught and we think that releasing it now would be better for us in the long run. If it was up to them though, these never would have seen the light of day. Which then makes you wonder, how many other videos like this are out there that you and me, we just don't know about? Number 4 on this list is the O'Hare incident. Chicago's O'Hare International Airport had quite the interesting experience back in 2006. Reader's Digest says, on November 7th, 2006, United Flight 446 was about to depart from Chicago's O'Hare International Airport when a dozen United Airline employees spotted an odd metallic craft hovering over the gate. The employees reported that it hung in the air for several minutes before finally shooting up at breakneck speed into the clouds. The strangest part? The UFO did not register on the airport's radar despite all the witnesses. The FAA declined to investigate, chalking it up to a weather phenomenon. A weather phenomenon. Seriously? Yeah. Alright there, guys. Also, for those who don't know, the FAA stands for the Federal Aviation Administration, and they're a government-run agency that deals with pretty much anything that flies. So don't get it twisted, guys. This was definitely the government deciding that they didn't want to do anything with this incident, or at the very least, they didn't want the public to know about it. But you'd think that they could come up with a better excuse than a weather incident, right? Like, I don't know about you guys, but I don't think I've ever seen a weather incident cause odd metallic things to hover in the sky. Number 3 on this list is the 7 strange crafts. So this one is really interesting because the government did address it, but they definitely didn't chalk it up to being what a lot of people thought it was in Aliens. Reader's Digest says a 1952 incident where 7 unidentified objects appeared over secure airspace near the Pentagon was captured on film. The crafts were registered on radar and jets were immediately sent to investigate these suspicious strange crafts. However, when the American jets approached that airspace, those 7 objects disappeared from the radar. When the jets landed, the objects returned to the radar screen once more. President Harry S. Truman was notified, and Air Force Intelligence Director General Sanford held a press conference saying that there were reports made by credible observers of relatively incredible things. It's this group of observations that we're attempting to resolve, but there was no resolution. So we kind of just heard from the government that they were on it, but then didn't really hear anything after that. There was no resolution, or at least there wasn't one that was released to the public. Could I believe that they did actually discover something here, and they just decided that telling the public wouldn't be the best course of action? Absolutely I could. In fact, I almost guarantee it. I highly doubt that the American government would have seen this stuff and then after one pass with the jets just been like, well, alright, guess nothing's there, and then call it quits. No, they definitely would have kept investigating and looking until they discovered something. Telling the public about that, though, probably wasn't in the cards. Number 2 on this list is the Richard French incident. So this is definitely one of the bigger cover-ups in UFO government history. Reader's Digest says in the 1950s, it was Lieutenant Colonel Richard French's job to explain away UFO phenomena for the government. There was only one problem. Lieutenant Colonel French actually saw alien ships with his own eyes, reports the Daily Mail. At a citizen hearing on disclosure in 2013, the then 83-year-old man told the truth for the first time about what he saw as a young man in the waters of St. John's, Newfoundland, 2 UFOs that had crashed and sunk in the water, and aliens trying to fix them. They succeeded and took off. He didn't mention UFOs in his report at the time. How's that for a freaky government cover-up? Yeah, so that's about as government cover-up as we can get, guys. My guy legit says UFOs saw aliens and specifically omitted it to save face and not panic the public. I guess the guilt and also just the whole story had been eating away at him for decades though, and eventually he had to come clean and tell the public. Too little too late though with a story like this, because we never got an opportunity to investigate these aliens or talk to them or anything. Or at least, that's if he's telling the truth. For all we know, he's still leaving some parts of the story out. Only the government and Richard really know what happened. And number 1 on this list is the unexpected visitor. A man named Rick Porcels, who lived in Texas, got a very unexpected and unwanted visitor late one evening at his home. The story goes like this. In 2008, an unfathomably large aircraft hovered above Stevensville, Texas. Many people in the community saw it, and according to the Mutual UFO Network, a pilot named Stephen Allen reported that the unusual aircraft was flying at an estimated 3,000 miles per hour and was being chased by fighter jets. Then, a man named Rick Sorrells said he saw the same thing while hunting. Later, Sorrells says a strange man knocked on his door and said, "Son, We have the same caliber weapons you have, but we have more of them. You need to shut your mouth about what you saw. Can you imagine getting a knock on your door and it being the government basically telling you that if you say anything, you're gonna die? Yeah, that is definitely an unexpected and unwanted visitor if you ask me. So not only were they threatening citizens, I also didn't hear any reports from the government about that jet that was flying behind the UFO. You'd think that if a jet fighter were deployed to chase down an enemy aircraft in friendly airspace, the public should probably know about it to stay safe. But nope. Absolutely nothing. Total radio silence from the government. How many other times have they gone to someone's house and threatened them like this that we don't know about? How many people have been intimidated by the government to stay silent? Really scary question that, honestly, we might not even want to know the answer to.
Number 5. TikTok sighting. Our first entry on this list comes to us from a very reputable source, TikTok user Drillabang, who posted this video recently online. The caption, "We caught them out there," is almost Mulder's catchphrase of "the truth is out there." Almost. And it seems like they are. The video shows a short clip of someone filming the sky and clouds, and passing through the clouds slowly is something. It's kind of hard to tell. It's an unidentified flying object. A small black being with what looks like tentacles protruding from it, like a little black jellyfish. The entity is moving slowly through the sky, with what looks like an electrical field following all around it. The being appears to be electrical, possibly a small mechanical drone. My first thought looking at one of these things is just how much this thing looks like the Sentinels from the Matrix. Could very well be evidence of the simulation leaking through. This clip is undeniably pretty odd. It's hard to make out just how big this flying entity is, although it does look a little bit small, but really it's hard to tell. Is it a spacecraft? Is it a living being but biomechanical? Is it a drone? Of course, it has to be said, the clip, as impressive as it is, could very well be a high production hoax. Like I said, the thing really does look a little too perfect for me, and it looks a lot like one of those Matrix Sentinels. I honestly wouldn't even be surprised if it's a shrunken down 3D model of it used for the video. But real or fake, you can't deny that the video is captivating and has people talking. Well, what do you think? Let me know down in the comments about this one if you think this has you convinced. And hey, while I've got you here listening, you want to see a whole lot more spooky stuff this month? Well, I got news for you, pal. I got boxes full of spooky stuff. Subscribe for a fresh fright in your inbox delivered daily. Number 4. Chilean UFO. Our next entry was posted to Reddit on r/aliens. I mean, where else are you gonna find alien clips? The video posted is filmed from a mountain in Chile, where a group of friends on a hike found something amazing in the sky, and luckily had their phones on them to record it. This entity floating around them doesn't really look like your traditional UFO sightings. It looks like a ball of pure energy just hovering above them in a triangular shape, looking like distilled pure light or just some photons or something. Looking around in the background, you can see there's nothing around them. No airports, no mysterious army bases nearby, just a big mountain range and a bizarre glowing ball of light hovering around aimlessly. A user on Reddit offered a rudimentary translation of the friends talking, which adds a little bit of insight to the clip. We can hear the friends joking that it could be a spirit bomb from Goku and there's going to be an epic duel soon. Goku is technically an alien, so I guess if Goku was real and you saw him flying around in the Nimbus cloud, that would qualify for a UFO sighting. They go on to joke that it looks like something out of the movie Independence Day. It's really hard to say just what this thing is. Now, usually I tend to roll a little bit more Scully than Mulder, and I'm naturally a bit skeptic, but I am completely out of ideas looking at this thing. The edges of the triangle are so very visible, and it doesn't really seem like it follows any one particular flight pattern. I can't take even the slightest guess what this might be, so your guess is just as good as mine, my ghouls and goblins. Take a look for yourself, and decide for yourself what the answer is. Number 3, the Ring of Light. Another entry coming to us fresh from Reddit, posted by user Jesse Zell. A short clip that shows us something incredibly bizarre. The clip is captioned appropriately, "The most unexplained thing I have ever seen in my life," and I'm strongly inclined to agree. Take a little look-see. In the clip, we get a pretty good shot at a suburban house and the overcast night sky above. A little bit above the house, there appears to be a ring of light that appears, circling around, appearing a few lights at a time, rounding the house a few times. That's bizarre. Even the skeptics should buy into this one. I mean, it's easy to just imagine a flying saucer hovering a little bit out of view atop the clouds, descending its undercarriage lights on the neighborhood. A user in the comments proposed that it could just be nothing more than a series of spotlights. But the original poster and uploader of the video insists that from where they were standing, the lights are appearing above the clouds, not below them. And even then, what explains the perfectly circular pattern displayed? The user goes on to say that there was no particularly loud noises emanating from around the sky, skies, and it was very hard to make out what was happening. They go on to add that they're very familiar with drones and have drones flying around their home with some regularity. I'm hoping they mean just a neighbor or an enthusiast and not that they're being watched. And that they would recognize a drone if there was one, and that they are certain these lights were not caused by drones. So just what is causing it? What was it? Is this Reddit user being observed by someone from the stars? Are they potentially a target for an abduction? We eagerly await a follow-up on this one. Number 2, the cube. Posted to YouTube by user, well, fittingly named, Is This a UFO? This brief 20-second clip showcases a pilot filming from inside the cockpit. Also, side note before I start talking about all the alien stuff, is that safe? Are you allowed to be doing that? I guess the plane doesn't crash in the video, so I'll take their word for it. Anyway, the clip is really short and sweet. We see from the window that there's a small cuboid-like shape blasting through the sky. The footage is extremely clear, unlike most UFO footage, and it's really easy to see what's happening, although it doesn't help matters much or provide you with any clear answers. What we can see is a small black cube propelling itself forward. There's no trail of smoke, no lights flashing, just a small black cube flying around. So what is that? Some comments in the video suggest that it could be a weather balloon or a helium balloon, although I gotta say the altitude is a bit questionable, or why it's traveling horizontally so fast. Its travel in the video does seem a bit pointed and intentional, like it's trying to get somewhere, although that could just be me wanting to apply sentient traits for it because I badly want to believe. Interestingly though, in 2014, a report from a 10-year Navy pilot veteran, Lieutenant Ryan Graves, claims that in his service, he would see UFOs nigh daily and would report them constantly, only to have his reports ignored. Interesting. He said in his time in the service, he'd see unexplainable objects flying by him at hypersonic speeds with no trails, no exhaust, often 30,000 feet up in the air undetected by his radar. He said one of the more consistent things that he would see was an object that looked like a sphere encased in a cube. Kinda sounds a bit like the cube propelling itself forward in this clip, doesn't it? Fascinatingly, after this report from Graves, the Navy announced it would be changing the way it handled UFO reports internally. Perhaps there's something they know and they're not telling us. Number 1, the laser pointer. And finally, we're down to our number 1 clip. Now this is my favorite clip of the bunch, by far. I mean, I would hope so, otherwise why would I bother putting it at the number 1 spot? This clip also comes to us from Reddit from user Luke511, filming above him what appears to be a ball of light bouncing around bizarrely in the sky. A UFO if I've ever seen one. Luke, who when faced with the dangers of the unknown, the wonders of the cosmos, possibly standing on a chance to make that fabled first contact with another civilization with unknown frontiers, stood proudly and takes a laser pointer out and starts flashing it upwards to the sky. Now I have nothing but respect for this absolute madman who got right down to brass tacks. Because him flashing that laser pointer made this video go from, oh, maybe that's a UFO, to, oh, that is definitely a spacecraft being piloted by an intelligent being. In the video, as soon as you see him flashing it around, the vehicle maneuvers on a dime, trying clearly to avoid the laser, which is pretty damning. Now the reason I love this clip so much, besides the fact that I do think it's pretty concrete evidence, assume these really are aliens flying around in that spacecraft. Imagine you're coming down to a new planet and you see a green beam coming from the ground pointing directly at you. Do you think they were freaking out? Do you think they were losing their minds, panicking that they got made? That laser was gonna come for them and destroy them? Or do you think it was more like a kitten situation? Like they saw the laser and got distracted by a really enticing game of intergalactic chase? Luke511, this has gotta be a top moment for humanity and for you as a whole. Tagging a UFO with a laser beam and potentially scaring alien life has got to be a landmark moment for us as a species. My only concern is that maybe this event might have sent intergalactic relations back just a little bit. I'm hoping aliens aren't afraid to visit the planet now because of the danger of green lights. We'll turn them off, we promise. We're sorry, it was just a little prank. Number 5, SCP-2019. Our first SCP featured on today's list is Euclid-class organism SCP-2019. This sapient cubical organism appears to us as a green gelatinous substance held in place by a thick, transparent membrane. The cube stands 5 meters by 5 meters by 5 meters and is housed deep inside foundation walls and kept unconscious through round-the-clock sedatives and fed intravenously. famously. SCP-2019 is highly resistant, despite its unassuming appearance. Any damage it incurs, it regenerates quickly in a matter of seconds. On the forward-facing side of the cube, there are 37 eyes resembling human eyes. SCP-2019 is able to move these eyes freely through the membrane in order to see around itself in a 360-degree radius. SCP-2019 has been recorded to sprout tentacular limbs of sorts to allow itself to move. Now, SCP-2019 displays an interesting creation ability, being able to conjure physical objects and even organic beings into reality. The most occurring evidence of this power is its tendency to grow additional brains. During regular monitoring, it's been recorded to grow additional brains at a rate of once every 2 months under favorable conditions. In order to keep SCP-2019 docile, the Foundation has been ordered to always limit it to 1 brain at a time, with all extraneous ones being removed surgically. SCP-2019 is highly intelligent. Interviews with SCP-2019 have been illuminating. While SCP-2019 cannot verbalize directly, it is able to communicate with signs and visualizations, allowing us to understand it better. SCP-2019 has told us that it was banished by the rest of its species for being an outsider, and that its home is far away from here. Although it has been prone to acts of aggression around Foundation staff, it will still be contained for study and general protection. Now, as always, the Foundation thanks you greatly for your interest. If you'd like to stay informed and stay protected, please consider subscribing to Top 5 Scary. Number 4. SCP-2020. SCP-2020 is a Euclid-class entity, a sapient bipedal humanoid entity standing approximately 7 feet tall. It possesses unnaturally long and thin limbs, and I am not describing myself, and it most closely resembles descriptions of little gray men that have been reported over the years. It's likely that SCP-2020 or a member of its species are what was spotted during the Roswell incident. SCP-2020 is composed primarily of a natural form of rubber that appears to serve all bodily functions: musculature, circulatory, and skeletal. SCP-2020 maintains a very simple diet, subsisting solely on paper and water for sustenance. Interestingly, in all time since the Foundation began observing SCP-2020, it has not displayed any visible signs of aging or any signs of growth. Further studies of its biology have been halted, as SCP-2020 is surprisingly resistant to any tearing, so sample studies cannot be collected. Research has been temporarily suspended. Socially, SCP-2020 displays several behaviors common with humans, such as its desire to learn, its desire to interact with humans, and its bizarre semi-understanding of social cues. It understands and speaks English proficiently, even answering to certain names. It's quite friendly to Foundation staff and eager to talk. It claims to have been originated from an advanced extraterrestrial civilization, but repeated questioning has produced wildly varying answers from SCP-2020 on the nature of said civilization, such as its technological prowess and other details. It seems most pleased when prompted to speak of its ideas for writing, often quite enthusiastically and jovially sharing its ideas for stories to researchers who are interviewing it. It claims it has a strong desire to be a science fiction writer. Slightly amusing to Foundation scientists, when interviewed, SCP-2020 is happy to share its many ideas, but never actually feels compelled to write any of them down, complaining that it's unable to choose a concept to focus on from its many ideas. Of note, during these interviews with SCP-2020 from Foundation members are that a number of its plot ideas for stories are rife with cliché and are often unfinished and quickly thought out. Nonetheless, researchers have reported finding 2020 a pleasant conversationalist, enjoying their sessions together. Number 3. SCP-2362. SCP-2362 is a Keter-class object and is the designation of the dwarf star Pluto, an interior Kuiper belt object. Public knowledge of SCP-2362 has been suppressed, intentionally of course, in order to decrease public interest in SCP-2362. In 1983, Foundation researchers uncovered that SCP-2362, formerly designated internally as Pluto, is an organic composition functioning like a shell for something, housing an entity hereto referred to as SCP-2362-1. It is an approximately 900 kilometer long object resembling a bell-shaped mass with 13 flowing tentacles behind it, most closely resembling a jellyfish. A research probe, Orpheus, was sent towards the dwarf planet in 2006 to confirm this hypothesis that the planet was actually an organic entity. The research was fascinating. A fissure was detected on the surface of the object's southern pole, measuring approximately 50 kilometers long and 10 kilometers wide. A repeated surveillance showed the fissure growing daily, increasing in size dramatically. As in a few weeks, the fissure grew from a meager 50 kilometers long to a staggering 950 kilometers long and 370 kilometers in width. After nearly 2 months of observation, 13 masses were spotted sprouting from the southern fissure. After 52 days, the fissure widened, revealing SCP-2362, splitting into 2 halves of one shell and releasing SCP SCP-2362-1, the jellyfish entity. Now, SCP-2362-1's motives are currently unknown, as well as any of its biological functions or drives. What little we do know of it is that it is somehow able to propel itself through space by expanding and contracting its appendages. The current trajectory that it appears to be following suggests that it will leave our solar system within the next 100 years, and as such, it is not considered a threatening object, although it will continuously be monitored by Foundation probes for your security. Number 2. SCP-163. SCP-163 is a safe class object of extraterrestrial origins. SCP-163 is a sapient organism, standing roughly 6.5 feet tall. Its body is roughly cylindrical, with a circular mouth at the bottom, an approximation of a head at the top, and 8 3-jointed legs circling around the body. SCP-163 has many specialized unique limbs to its species, including 2 prehensile feeding limbs on either side of the mouth, 2 arms near the top of its body used for delicate precision manipulating, 2 larger arms located closer to its legs used for heavier manipulation, and 2 appendages of indeterminate function located between the legs and mouths, but it appears they have been amputated prior to SCP-163's retrieval. SCP-163 was discovered crashed inside a spacecraft in the Andes Mountains and discovered by local miners. The spacecraft had largely been scavenged, but SCP-163 had been kept encased, hidden in stasis. Upon discovery, the retrieval crews brought it to the Foundation, where it was given adequate accommodations. A receiving room with an airlock with room for guests, a storage room where SCP-163 is allowed to keep approved objects, a workshop as well as a dining room, and a sleeping quarters where SCP-163 can rest. SCP-163 displays very good behavior. Its outstanding good behavior is notable by Foundation standards. As such, it is allowed to take short sabbatical trips around the facility, accompanied by a junior researcher for supervision, of course. SCP-163 and any researchers present need to be equipped with isolation suits in order to prevent any cross-contamination between species. SCP-163 displays an advanced level of intelligence, a deep understanding of its own technology, and an ability to express itself artistically when given painting supplies, and has made several attempts to communicate with Foundation personnel. Difficulties have arisen, of course, because SCP-163 is unable to verbalize and only has a rudimentary ability to gesture by furrowing its skin slightly. One of the more docile entries housed by Foundation walls, SCP-163 has been an indelible asset in growing to understand our place in the universe. Number 1. SCP-1281. SCP-1281 is a large safe class object, a biomechanical entity that was found during a routine containment operation of SCP-2362, if you remember from earlier. SCP-1281 is a vaguely teardrop-shaped entity, measuring roughly 12 meters from end to end and 11 meters across. It's spotted with dish-shaped structures on the surface that presumably serve to function as receivers for electromagnetic energy. Several elements and fragments of other mechanical parts are present across the surface of SCP-1281, intimating that more appendages were present at one point, possibly having been damaged. The biological elements of SCP-1281 appear to have grown completely over a technological mechanical frame designed to live in deep space. It's theorized that SCP-1281 was designed for deep space interstellar travel, but a majority of its essential systems had been damaged by unknown sources. Carbon dating has suggested that SCP-1281 is upwards of 1.3 billion years old. SCP-1281 attempted several times to broadcast a message to Foundation researchers, initially broadcasting solely simple binary codes and mathematical concepts. Eventually, it was able to maintain a conversation with our researchers, where it revealed that itself had been sent to share a message from its creator. Paraphrasing slightly, it spoke of its home species and planet that had died off, and wanted to relay its message to other species to warn them, telling them that they must light the darkness. Through SCP-1281, which was known as the Harbinger from its species, this lost species is able to live on in a way, if only through the proof of SCP-1281. After this broadcast, SCP-1281 had asked its interviewer if it had done its job well, if it had performed well. It shut off shortly thereafter. The researcher told it that it did in fact do a good job, and thanked it for its service. The researcher was reprimanded afterwards for breaking protocol for provoking an emotional response.
Number 5 on this list is the wow signal. The wow signal is a sound that an astronomer received many years ago that, as of right now, is probably the closest thing we've ever gotten to alien contact. Now, I do want to say that just because we got this signal doesn't mean that they're living among us. However, it does give a strong indication that they're out there in the first place, which is frankly half the battle. Intelligencer writes, in 1977, Ohio State's Big Ear Radio telescope intercepted a 72-second burst of sound that bore signs of having come from interstellar space, which could be a sign of extraterrestrial communication. The anomaly measured 1,420 megahertz, a frequency in the water hole, the term for a radio emission range thought ideal for intergalactic messages because it's unusually quiet. Jerry Amon, the astronomer who spotted it, was so excited that he scribbled a giant "wow" on his printout. Astronomers' explanations for the bizarre phenomenon include secret spy satellites and a passing comet nobody knew about in 1977. But many admit nothing explains it adequately, and even if the signal doesn't prove aliens exist, it's still a tug on the cosmic fishing line. To date, it remains the best evidence of alien communication ever obtained. So wow is right in this case. To receive something like that is a very strong indication that not only is there life out in the universe, but it's also intelligent life. At least intelligent enough to be operating sound systems powerful enough to emit such a frequency in the first place. Again, it's not proof that they're assuredly here on Earth, but it's a good start for sure. Number 4 on this list is habitable planets. Scientists are currently finding more and more planets that are in what is called the Goldilocks zone. The Goldilocks zone is the area from a star that is not too cold and also not too hot, so it should be able to support life from how we've come to understand it. As science learns more and more about these planets, there have been a few that have surfaced that scientists are particularly bullish about. Proxima b, TRAPPIST-1 system, LHS-114-OB, Ross-128b, GJ-121-4b. Now, those probably mean absolutely nothing to you at all, but those are all the planets that have been discovered to be in the Goldilocks zone and could support life. They are also all the planets that people have reported scientists not wanting to talk about. There's a bit of a conspiracy theory going on right now that scientists have actually discovered proof of alien life in these locations, but are hiding it from the public so as to not start a mass chaos. Now, this is all speculation, but why else would these scientists want to hide information about planets that are apparently in the perfect spot to harbor life? Hard to say for sure, but aliens are definitely a possibility. Number 3 on this list is the numbers game. The universe has widely been believed to be infinite. That means it's really freaking big. If the universe is infinite, then it only makes sense that there would be at least some place out there that has other life. That, my friends, is basically the numbers game. BBC writes, most scientists agree that alien life almost certainly exists in the universe somewhere. Our galaxy contains in the region of 300 billion stars, and we're now discovering planets traveling around these stars. The more we look and the more technology we put out there, the more of these exoplanets we find. To date, we've detected around 4,000, and that's just in our galaxy. If we look at the universe as a whole, then there are approximately 200 billion galaxies. Why would life just occur here? We're pretty convinced it's out there, says space scientist Maggie Adarin-Pocock. It is purely a numbers game, it is a probability. So this argument makes a lot of sense to me, guys. 200 billion galaxies, that is a lot of galaxies and a lot of stars in those galaxies, and basically just a lot of chances to have life appear. Now, this life doesn't necessarily need to be living among us. It could be out in the universe waiting to be found, but similar to our WOW signal example, this is a great start. It's widely believed in the scientific community that there is life out there, and who knows, maybe it's here too. Number 2 on this list is the billionaires. Now, this is going to be a bit of a fallacy because I'm going to appeal to authority with this one. Basically, I'm going to say that there are a bunch of smart, powerful, and rich people out there who believe in the existence and presence of aliens, and therefore we should too. Now, I understand that this is a fallacy and not concrete evidence, but I do believe that acknowledging these people's opinions and at least questioning why they might be thinking this way, well, that's important. Let's name off a few people who are currently obsessed with space travel and contacting aliens. Robert Bigelow, Elon Musk, Paul Allen, Yuri Milner, Jeff Bezos, Franklin Antonio. What do these gentlemen have in common? Well, they are all super rich and they are all fascinated with space and aliens. Now, this isn't proof of anything. This isn't evidence that says aliens are among us, but I do think that it's a sign. If I saw these men all investing in the same stock, then I would also invest in that same stock. If I saw all of these men looking at the same thing, and in this case aliens and space travel, and throwing billions of dollars at it, then I'd wonder to myself, why are they doing that? Well, they're probably doing that because they seem to think that aliens are in fact real and potentially are among us. I can comfortably acknowledge that every single one of those people that I listed is more intelligent than I am, and if every one of them are deeply invested in aliens, then I think that's a sign maybe we should be as well. And finally, number 1 on this list is the encounters. Sometimes we think of encounters with aliens as being few and far between, or that those who have had encounters with said aliens are off their rocker or aren't being truthful. Based on the amount of encounters that we've had and the individuals or groups involved in said encounters, both of those assumptions are categorically false. The fact of the matter is that there have been hundreds, thousands of encounters that humans have had with potential alien life throughout the years. Detailed accounts of everything that went down. Stuff that doesn't seem likely for someone to make up. Whether it be Barney and Betty Hill's abduction, Antonio Villas-Boas, the Foo Fighters, the Kecksburg UFO crash, Kenneth Arnold's incident, the Phoenix Lights, or any of the other many notable encounters that have happened in the past, no one can deny that people have been seeing aliens for quite a while. So picking an encounter at random, let's talk about the Travis Walton abduction. This is just another one of the many encounters that hit the big news after it happened. Intelligencer says, in 1975, a team of loggers claimed their 22-year-old co-worker, Travis Walton, disappeared for 5 days after a glowing disc in the Arizona woods zapped him with a bluish ray. Intrigued, he'd reportedly wandered underneath the hovering object and it abducted him. He claims he awoke on a table in a sterile-looking room surrounded by 3 well-developed fetuses wearing tan robes. He tried to flee, passed out, then regained consciousness only once the aliens had ditched him on the Arizona roadside. The news blew up when Walton was finally found. Apparently him and the group of guys passed lie detector tests, and Walton himself was taken to a hypnotist to try and see if he was lying, which he wasn't. So in this case it's clear Walton at least wholeheartedly believes he's telling the truth. Also, if he wasn't telling the truth, or that's not what happened to him, then where the heck was he for 5 entire days? A guy just vanished off of the face of the planet for 5 days and is found walking along the roadside in Arizona later? Like, that doesn't just happen, folks. Due to the extensive amount of encounters and the detail to which the stories are described, how can we say without a doubt that aliens aren't living among us? I'll answer that for you. We can't.